Welcome to Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast, episode 73. Hi, I'm Chris. Thank you for joining us.
And I'm Jill. Chris and I are the founders of the Becoming Ellie community, a place for women over 50 who are interested in being fit and strong.
If you're a new listener, welcome. And I know you're wondering why we're called Becoming Ellie. Jill and I decided we wanted to be like Ellie because she's the Norse goddess of aging who defeated Thor in a wrestling match. We thought we wanted to be like any woman who could beat Thor.
Yeah. You can check us out and subscribe at our website, becomingellie.com. Ellie is spelled E-L-L-I. So this episode is our last one of 2020. This has been such a challenging year that I think we're all struggling with our emotions and our mental state.
Yeah, that describes me perfectly.
Yeah.
I don't know what Ellie's mental state was, but I do know that being fit and strong includes reducing stress and trying to find the joy in our lives.
Today's guest gives us some ideas on using creativity to help us with that.
Let's go to the podcast.
Today's guest is Tracy Keenan. Tracy and I have known each other since high school, lost touch with each other, and then, thanks to social media and a high school reunion, became reacquainted. Tracy Keenan is a Presbyterian pastor, an Enneagram-based coach, and sees creative work as essential to sanity, health, and well-being.
She studied music as an undergraduate and continued writing and performing music, even though she got her degree in early childhood education. She has both a master's and a doctorate in ministry, has pastored 4 churches in the course of 30 years, and is now a mid-council leader in Castle Presbytery.
She cherishes friendships among a wide variety of people from various traditions, conditions, religions, and opinions. She and her husband, Jim Mehler, have 2 grown daughters. She writes music, fiction, and poetry, rides a Harley, and looks for the joy. Welcome, Tracy. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Yes, so thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm so impressed with the work that you two do, and so it's really an honor to be part of it.
Well, thank you. You and I have known each other since high school, which was a while ago. And we were on the literary magazine together. Mm-hmm. In many ways, that seems like ages ago. In many ways, it doesn't seem. I still remember sitting next to you when we were taking our little application test to be on the literary magazine. But you are obviously still living a creative life. Can you just first of all tell us about your music and writing experiences?
I can. I was a music major for half of my college career, but I changed course, got a degree in early childhood education, go in that different direction. And during that time, and for probably a dozen years afterwards, I played the piano and sang in bars and restaurants and for private parties. If your corporation was having a party and wanted to hire a pianist for the cocktail hour or for dinner, I was often that person. And I also wrote music. And so sometimes I would include that. As I was preparing for ministry, at first I thought that I would be a music minister, although not in the traditional sense because I didn't play the organ. But contemporary music was becoming a thing in the church at that point, and I thought I would really be a part of that. But then as I was in seminary, it shaped me more towards pastoring. And so I became a pastor who also does music. And so I did that a lot. I joked around with Jill at one point saying, the 2 creative outlets I have, music and writing. The writing part, when people would ask me, non-church people would ask me if I'm a writer, and I would say, I write a piece each week as performance art. Because it was not only the study and the crafting of that piece, but it would be the delivery of that piece that was important. And then it was done. It was deadlines every week.
So that would be like a sermon?
It would be a sermon.
Okay. Performance art. I like the way you put that. Yeah.
And then the music. I always pastored churches that were, I think, very indulgent and would allow me to do music as part of the sermon, part of the performance art. If it was something, sometimes I wrote a song because there would be a situation in Bible story that I'd think there should be a song about that. One example is when Jacob is wrestling, and, the scripture's kind of vague about it. It's a man, or is it an angel, or is it God's own self? But Jacob's involved in this wrestling. And I thought, oh my gosh, how many times are we just feeling like life is beating the whop out of us? Or, we're just wrestling with life, and I thought, there should be a song about wrestling with life, the struggle of it. I never hear a song about that. So I wrote one that was a blues. It was a kind of dirty sounding blues piece that was about, finding a blessing in the struggle and crying out and yelling. And there was some yelling in it. So anyway.
That's pretty cool. I don't know if you know the story of why we picked Ellie for our namesake, becoming Ellie, but she supposedly was challenged to a wrestling match with Thor and won. And she's the Norse goddess of aging. So, that whole wrestling thing is something that we embrace with becoming Ellie. All right, that's kind of a stretch, I guess.
No, it came to my mind too that, Thor had to wrestle Ellie, and I think the moral of the story was you can't beat old age, but we took it that, look, she's so strong, even Thor.
Yep. She's been wrestling and she's been working out and training, and don't underestimate, women of a certain age for sure. And
I love that.
Yeah, we get inspired by it. This came to mind as Jill was talking about in your bio. You ride a Harley and you're a minister who loves music. Just those things kind of conjure up. You must be an adventuresome person. Would you characterize yourself that as an adventuresome person? And how would, give me some examples if
I would characterize myself that way. But let me come back 1 second to the thing about Ellie as the goddess of old age who beats Thor in a wrestling match. There is a sense of aging for me, for us as women, that brings out something of the badass in us that doesn't feel possible when we're younger. Another thing that I had written was a full circuit, I guess, of pieces. Let me try and explain this better. If you have the from the book of Genesis through the book of Revelation, but you lay down a human life over it. And so Genesis is, like early childhood or infanthood, where everything is provided for you and, everything's nice. And then there's, the story of the fall. Well, how many of us have things in our life where we're going like, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. Or you could liken it to toddlerhood, where everything is, you move on to, if you're looking at early childhood, the age of industry and so forth, looking at the people of God establishing themselves as a nation. And then you go into wilderness time. Oh my gosh, in our lives, there's this wilderness time, and going all the way through till Revelation. The song that I wrote for that was called Apocalypso, and it's about like shaking off everything that doesn't matter anymore. You get to the end of your life and you're going like, that didn't matter and this didn't matter. What really matters? But somewhere in the middle, kind of late middle, I did a song called Anjanu, and the chorus of it is, this is where the Anjanu dies. Because in movies, the Anjanu was always the young romantic interest, and there'd be danger and so forth, but the Anjanu never dies, right? She comes through and is saved at the whatever. And I thought, no, there comes a point in our lives where, the Anjanu dies, and you move into something that's more of a badass. and because you have a sense, you can let go of a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter anymore. And you can also hold on to what matters, and you can start deciding what risks you want to take, I wouldn't have ridden a motorcycle when I was in my 20s because I probably would have killed myself on one. I didn't start riding a motorcycle till I was in my 50s. And, I was perfectly aware of the dangers. Whenever I ride, you can bet that I'm leathered out for protection, that I have a helmet on, that I'm wearing a fluorescent vest, which does not look cool at all. But it also, there's not a moment that I go out that I don't remember, like, you have to be the one who's aware because the rest of the world is not looking out for you. Be as aware and as careful as you can, but still enjoy life's ride.
You still have a lot of adventure in you. Yeah.
Wow. You did not start riding your bike until you were in your 50s.
Yeah.
Wow. That's unusual. Most people say, I'm in my 50s now and I'm no longer going to ride my motorcycle.
Well, a lot of people like to try new things when, in your 50s, typically your life changes a little bit. You don't have maybe the family responsibilities that you had at one time, and you have some free time. And it's like, what do I really want to do here? It's maybe more of a experimental time in life that when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, you're committed to your career and building a family or other responsibilities maybe that take more time. So
Exactly. So back to still using music and so forth, there was an event that I would like to tell you about because I think it really has to do with your purpose.
Okay.
There was a period of several years where I did not write any fiction. I didn't write much, if any, poetry, and I wasn't writing any music. It was sort of a dull period, I suppose. And I was in the middle of doing my training in Enneagram-based coaching. And as part of all of that, there was a masseuse who was offered to us in any of our off hours, available for us to get some relaxation and muscle relaxation and so forth. But we were also told that this particular masseuse had a way of intuiting things in our lives. And if we were open to it, she might say something or not, and so to kind of be ready for that. So I went to do that, and she did some wonderful muscle work and so forth. But near the end of all of it, she suddenly said to me, have you been sick lately? And I said, no. And she said, are you sick right now? And I said, no. And she said, your life force is really weak. And I said, okay, And she said, do you mind if I say something to you?
Wow.
Not at all. And she said, this came to me and I'm just passing it on to you. She said, do you have creative work that you have been avoiding? And I said,
that's interesting.
Yes. As a matter of fact, yes. In fact, the night before that, I had a dream that as I was telling it to the people in my cohort, it became very clear that the two little girls in my dream who needed to be taken care of were about music and about writing because of their names. They were very evocative names. One was named Euphonia and one was named Eudora. And someone said, well, what does that mean to you? And I said, music and writing. So here's this woman saying this creative work that you have been avoiding. And I said, as a matter of fact, there is. And she said, that's what you need to do to get your life force strong again. And I went right back home. I took a sabbatical. I worked on the music for that album that I told you about. That's that whole 12 pieces that go from Genesis to Revelation, and never mentioned Bible stuff. Because one of the things that, as much as I'm a pastor and I write a lot of music and I use a lot of that music in worship, it's not really what would be recognizable as churchy music or Bible-y music. It's life music that if you can connect it to a story or something in scripture. Anyway, that was my whole huge effort of work there. And yep, I got my life spirit strength back again.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's really cool.
That's actually more specific. I one time went to a thing, it was a yoga class, but there was a woman who was going to do some sort of Reiki at the end of the class. So it wasn't like a whole Reiki, but at any rate, she did whatever she did to everyone, but she never came near me. And at the end of the class, she said, there were 2 people in this class that my spirit guide told me not to go near.
Wow.
And I was totally flipped out.
Did she say why?
No, and that was it. Someone said, if you could have seen your face. But I never found out why. So something a little more specific was probably
It would have
helpful.
been good to hear specific about that.
Wow.
Yes.
Like they don't need it, or
Well, that's it. Was I in such great shape that I didn't need anything? Or was I in such bad shape that it was...
Or maybe in conflict
I
with
was
their
doomed to-
spirit. Who knows?
Perhaps. I don't know, but it was a little
it was,
disconcerting.
yeah.
I'm glad she gave you something more than your life force is weak, because then you would have
Me
been
too.
worried.
I would have been like, what's wrong? Do I have something that I don't know about?
Right, yeah.
When you were telling that story about the life force being weak, I picture this is an old movie, but I imagine most of the folks listening will recognize it. But it's the movie with Michael J. Fox where he goes back to the future and he's playing guitar. And while he's playing, his parents aren't getting together on the dance floor at the prom or whatever it is. And he's starting to fade. His life force is going, and he's like falling down. And then all of a sudden, something happens. I think McFly punches the bad guy, and the next thing you know, his parents are dancing together, and all of a sudden, boing, he's back up and into the world again. That's how I picture life force. I don't know. It's pretty.
In your bio that we said that you look for the joy.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think just part of my, personality and motivation and so forth, I do look for things that will bring joy or spark joy for me. Actually, do you mind if I talk a little bit about the Enneagram?
Oh, yeah, no, we sort of cut that off, but no, please go ahead.
Okay. The Enneagram is a personality typing tool, but the joy of it, speaking of joy, although there are 9 basic types, when you are able to identify the type, it really helps you to do the work of self-awareness, of understanding your motivations for certain things. Helps you to recognize when you're moving into stress, and to also give you tools for moving into ways that will integrate. And the cool thing about it is that identifying your type doesn't put you in a box, but it helps give you tools for moving and growing beyond your type. And I tend to identify as a type 7, which is one that does look for the joy, that looks for adventure, that looks for stimulation. And so if I get too much into a groove that's quiet and routine, it can be really good for a while, but there will be something in me that will be needing to look for the joy there. In writing either music or fiction, I have discovered that I don't have enough bandwidth to work on both in the same season of my life. So in recent months, I've sort of stepped away from the music and moved into writing fiction. And the joy for that for me is that I completely kind of immerse myself in a different world and really feel consumed by that. It reminds me of this. Years ago, I went scuba diving. It was my one and only scuba diving experience. Sitting on the edge of the boat with the tank on my back and the register in my mouth and so forth. We were out on choppy waters. This also is a life thing. So we were out on choppy waters. I'm sitting there on the edge of the boat, and I am easily prone to seasickness. And so I'm sitting there thinking, breakfast is going to come up. And I don't know what to do, because if I don't take the register out of my mouth in 2 seconds, there will be breakfast in the register, which is not recommended by scuba divers everywhere. Sitting on the edge of the boat, bouncing up and down, reaching up, trying to motion to the people who were in charge that I had to take this out. They thought I was just holding it and pushed me off the boat. So I hit the water, went down underwater, and all of a sudden, everything was quiet except for my breathing. From swimming underwater, it's like flying. You can move in 3 dimensions, not just a linear plane. And I could see whole worlds, and I could go upside down, and everything calmed way down, and I was surrounded by a completely different world. That's what fiction writing is like for me. There may be this choppiness of of what life is doing at the moment. It may be making me queasy or whatever, just agitated. Writing takes me down to a deeper place where it's calming and it's adventuresome at the same time. I feel like I'm immersing myself in a world, and all I need to do is write down what I see or what I feel or what I experience. And that is life-giving and joy-giving in that respect too.
That's really cool. So many of us are dealing with stress and the pandemic. And, you were talking about how you're able to integrate stress with the tools to grow with it and beyond it. Do you have any specific advice for our listeners of how to do that kind of thing, regardless of what basic type we are?
I think most of us are aware on some level of what brings us joy, what is life-giving. If we phrase it in terms of what's life-giving more than for what's joy, because sometimes something can be life-giving that is not joyful. A moment, my sister had a colicky baby, and I don't do well when I'm sleep deprived. Maybe other people do, but and we were in a hotel room, and she was walking the baby. He wouldn't, he couldn't quiet down. And at one point, she shook me, got me up, and thrust the baby in my arms. So I'm walking around with the baby now, and tears are coming down my cheeks because I'm so tired, and this baby will not quiet down. There's nothing that I'm doing will make any kind of a difference. And then all of a sudden there was this sense of, oh my gosh, I love this. And I was like, where did that come from? But that was my first sense of a maternal urge. I was a teenager at the time, but that wouldn't have been considered joy, walking that baby in the middle of the night. But for me, it was life-giving in that moment. So let me redefine and not keep it limited to joy, but make it have it be whatever it is that life-giving. And we all have a sense of what's life-giving. If Netflix is life-giving for you, maybe it would bear some exploration, because maybe it's the idea of story that is life-giving.
I see.
It may not be sitting there vegging out on the sofa night after night, but maybe it's the idea of story. Because for me, story is life-giving. So what I do is put like Audible or Scribd on my phone, and I pick out books that I might not be able to slog through otherwise, and put them in my earbuds, and I go out and I walk between 5 and 10 miles about 3 days a week, listening to Dostoevsky or listening to, I also listen to Stephen King, so don't get all. But it's this, when I realized that story was life-giving for me, I thought I don't have to be the passive recipient of story. I can get out there and move around. And as Neil Gaiman likes to say, hearing a story exercises your mind every bit as much as reading a story does, because your mind still has to do the imaginative work. Netflix won't do that. Netflix already did the imaginative work. They just show it to you. But finding ways to give your mind a workout as well as your body for that. So I would say look for what's life-giving. And then if it's something that's completely passive, not at all that you're having trouble figuring out how that can be a good thing to keep integrated in your life, well, find out what's behind it. What's the thing in there that is life-giving?
Yeah.
And find a way to have that be part of who you are and what you do.
So if your time is being spent watching Netflix, you're right, it could be that it's story, but it could be something else, because there's lots of different things on, there's all those documentaries on Netflix, and maybe you really like history or whatever. Yeah. That's a good point, that it's not just, I like to sit and watch history documentaries or whatever. I actually like the history part or whatever. We shouldn't be just sitting around watching Netflix, probably. Well, it is a very passive thing. You're right. There's no intellectual demand made on you when everything is already written and shown, and it's the complete package.
It's already been figured out for you, and you get to do your figuring and to follow it. But it is much more passive. So
I had a friend who refused to watch any of the Lord of the Rings movies because she loved those books so much, and she had read them so many times that she said she knew exactly what the characters looked like, and she did not want Peter Jackson's vision of it to interfere with what her mind had already created.
Right.
When I think of when I'm about to binge some Netflix episodes, rather than just go on to the next episode, because that's one thing that Netflix does is just keep you going.
Oh, yeah.
I try to pause it and then do some reps with weights or something like that,
Ooh.
just to have, because there's no commercials, but,
Right.
run up and down the stairs and do another load of laundry or whatever it might be. But, so I'm not just sitting there episode after episode, because some of those, they do a good job with the cliffhangers many times.
Oh, they do.
They do. And then it just feeds you right into the next one.
Yeah.
Just speaking of that, one of the things that my daughter's a playwright. One of the things that I love is talking about Netflix episodes with her, because we will pull out different things that we like or dislike, or things that really held us, or things that seemed incongruous. But then again, it's a springboard to interaction with another. I will say that our literary magazine group from high school, I guess a few months ago during COVID, we organized a writing group that gets together on Zoom every other week, and we read pages we've written in the meanwhile. Or, one of them is reading his mother's poetry, which is really beautiful. But in this sharing, each of us, we have interaction about it. We have feedback. We have, this is what I liked, and this is what you could do to enhance what you've done. But it also gives us an audience for whom to write. We know that I could finish these pages because we're going to be meeting again in a few days. And it's the interaction also for me that's really life-giving, especially during this time where we are, all of us, put into work that is much more interior than otherwise might be, which is good. But I also need to make sure that I'm connecting, at least artistically, with people. So that matters.
Back to community, regardless of whether it's through Zoom or Facebook
or in person.
But that doesn't happen so much lately.
Right, it's not happening.
It sparks us.
Yeah.
It sparks us. That's what, your whole becoming Ellie thing seems to be doing. There's this, when you hear what someone else is doing, or how they're managing something, or how they're challenging themselves, then it wakes that up in you, where you're saying, I wonder if I could do that. I wonder what would challenge me, what might help me get to the next step. And steps lead to the next level. I mean, there's just so many ways that we can continue discovering ways to be more and more badass in our old age.
What role does being creative play for most of us in dealing with stress?
On a really basic level, I would say that it has to do with coping and problem solving. One of the ways that stress for many of us is this feeling that we are faced with something out of which there is no escape. So there's the stress. This person won't stop doing this one thing, or the world won't stop doing this thing, and I want this to stop, or I want this to happen, and it's not happening. And there's this sort of sense of things not being how we want them, very, very simply. And so I think sometimes when we're able to tap into the creative side of ourselves, we start to get curious and ask different questions. What might stop this cycle? What could interrupt? What could trip it up in a good way? What could, what other options are there here? I'm really only thinking, not this. Yes, that. But, what other options are there? And starting to, creativity at its very basic is finding other ways.
Do you think creativity helps with cognitive health? As we age, many of us worry about keeping our cognitive skills as sharp as we can.
I wonder if there have been studies done about that. Because my vast zero experience of studying that, I would say, oh, definitely. But I also realize that my motivator for creative stuff is because because it's interesting, because it's stimulating, because it's for me joyful and life-giving.
Yeah.
But I bet it does. It has to.
I don't know. I just know when you listen to people who actually study this, they'll say things like, learn a new skill, study a language, No one says, go out and write a novel, but I don't see why that couldn't be just as powerful.
Well, I'm just thinking about this because creativity could be writing or music, but it could be creating, doing different crafts. I know a lot of my friends really like to do crafts, whether it's, and most of those are more sedentary, I guess, whether it's sewing or.
I've been knitting a lot over the past 6 months.
Yeah, it does definitely engage different parts of your brain, and there's something satisfying about it. So that I don't know if it is solving any problems with dementia or with Alzheimer's or something like that, but it's definitely strengthening some paths, particularly if you're using two hands, or creative dance. I know when you just dance, it does something in your brain. And, of course, I'm no brain scientist or anything, but I can feel it sometimes. I mean, you could just feel it in your head. It strengthens coordination or something.
There's Daniel Levinsky. I have several books by him. He has like Your Brain on Music, how music affects your brain, ranging from how did the songs that you listened to in high school affect certain things. But he's an actual neuroscience who talks about the effect of music on the brain. And the idea of creativity is often putting things together that might not otherwise go together, or taking disparate parts and making them one, or taking things apart and seeing what remains. And that feels to me like problem solving. That feels to me like, when I'm writing music, I'll very often have a simple melody line and a few simple chords. And then I'll think, what would happen if I changed this chord to that chord? What would happen if I took out this note? What if I took this melody line and instead of making it go up to here, made it only come up to there and added this harmony? What might happen there? So it's sort of taking parts apart, taking little bits out, putting little bits back in a different way. What would happen if I did it with a drum groove? Let me find a drum groove and then see what that brings out. And it's this experimentation that I think has to awaken the cognitive parts of your mind in really healthy ways. It's that sense of adventure and exploration, even in putting together a recipe. What would happen if I added cumin? What would happen if I left this one out? I didn't have it. What could I put in instead? And it's experimentation and exploration.
Can we go back to the Enneagram that you talked about earlier? Is that finding that your personality type, is that something that you need to do in a group, or is that something a person can just go out and do? Or
you can do it easily on your own. It's ENNEAGRAM. I tend to use the Riso Hudson Enneagram type indicator online, but there are lots of online tests. Most of them you can do a lot of them for free. If you end up with sort of mixed results where one doesn't seem to be very clearly resonating with you, there is one that you can pay like $12 to do that's more in depth and tends to give you, my experience has been, it gives you the same result, only more clearly.
Okay.
But there are lots of ways of exploring that. And, again, they have to do with what motivates you in your world and that self-awareness to recognize when you're moving into stress or how you can move into integration.
I know in one job I had, we went through as a Gallup, Strength
Finders.
And when I did that, the free thing was you got your top 5. Do you remember in Star Trek when they found this race that had evolved and they were just brains and like globes? That was me. There was not... Everything that I had as a strength was
all up in your brain.
Things. There was not like one thing about talking to people. I said, this can't quite.
That's so funny. There are 3 in the Enneagram. You have three head types, 3 heart types, and 3 gut types. And I'm a head type. And when I was first doing it, I used to say, I think of my body as something that I wash, feed, and groom so it can carry my head around, because
that's interesting.
My lid is right up here.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was sort of mine. I was like, oh my goodness.
Well, Well, that's kind of what I was wondering about. Like with creativity, is it always in your head? I mean, I try to think of some of the things that I do, like gardening. I consider that somewhat creative, where I'm going to move the plants or take certain plants out or trim them back a certain way. Is there something that physically, like you talked a little bit about heart and gut, and, how does that relate to creativity?
Well, I think music for me is very physical because I play the piano and sing. And so that tends to take all of your body. But I look at other art forms. You were mentioning dance before. Even if you're a terrible dancer, there's something really fun about like putting on James Brown and just like carrying on, putting on something where you do get to move your body. That is a creative effort. It's expressive. It's part of lots of people putting together, I'm not as good with visual arts, but I so appreciate people who can make color happen, or people who can knit and give you something tactile to hold on to. The only things I have are things that you can take in by your eyes and your ears. I value what other art forms bring and how you're physically involved in making that happen. I think some are certainly they need more of your body's expression than others.
While you were saying that, I was thinking about watching different people ski. I'm not that good of a skier, but I've seen people doing snowboarding and skiing that definitely is creative. When they're doing the pipes and the half rounds or skateboarding and things like that. That's a little bit beyond me. My creativity is trying to just stay upright and navigate the turns and all of that. And the other thing that came to mind too was playlists with the music.
Yes.
Jill and I were training for the half marathons. The playlists were crucial for me. Really get you moving, for sure. Different songs. It's not just the speed and the beat, but the words and the touches me in my heart sometimes. So.
It does. And I think part of where creativity intersects with the body's well-being can have to do with using your creativity to find ways to make your more boring exercise goals much more enjoyable. Listening to stories, listening to music, doing something that is your reward for also doing the reps or doing whatever it is that you're needing to do, and finding ways to sort of trick yourself into having a real treat by, I'll go exercise because then I can listen to this.
Right. I have done that at times in my life. Of like the only time I'm allowed to listen to this book is when I am on a treadmill. And I would go to the gym and then I'd be, you'd be doing your workout on the treadmill and then realizing, if I stay on this treadmill for another 15 minutes, I can hear the rest of the chapter.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you don't even notice you're on the treadmill. You're just listening away. You're in a different world, right?
Right. Yeah. But if you only allow yourself to do that at certain, you link the pleasure with the task.
Yeah.
It can be very rewarding. It's a good way to get through the task.
And that in itself is a creative solution. You're putting together the treat with the duty and making a new thing.
So are there ways for us to improve our creativity? Chris talking about the skiing made me think of ice skating, because you and I grew up with ice skating. We had an ice skating rink in the area and everyone went. But I was never a figure skater, as in, I'd skate around the rink and chat with people. But in my head, I would see those figure skaters doing their leaps and turns, and I never did any of that. But in my head. But all right, so is there a way to improve? I'm not saying how do I change from being a regular ice skater to a figure skater, because I guess if I wanted to do that, I would find someone to instruct me. But is there a way just in general to sort of improve our creativity, or how do we take our strengths or our whatever we're doing and become better at that? Any ideas?
I think we're back to sparking and learning. We can always learn more. any kind of creative endeavor, working with others to put something together, like music writing. I have a couple of people that I have collaborated with to write music. And, it turns out differently than I expected, but it always turns out better. It's those kinds of things where we learn from each other, and even putting together arrangements. Someone will say, well, why don't we do this? And I think, I never would have thought of that. So these things are stretching us beyond what we do. But if there are people who are just wanting to explore a certain medium of creativity, there are so many ways that we can learn. And any kind of learning is really good for the cognitive skills too.
True.
Lessons. One of the things that I think about when I get back to music is I would love to actually get some vocal coaching, because my vocal technique is terrible. I told you about a song where I'm yelling on it. That doesn't... I would love to take some voice lessons, and there are people and groups and so forth that can help you sharpen skills, help you totally acquire skills. And any kind of learning like that has to be good for the brain, good for the mind.
Yeah. In our podcast, we focus a lot, of course, on being fit and strong, but also the mental and emotional aspect of good health. And I was wondering, with your background in so many different areas of creativity and the ministry and all these different things, is there some advice that you could give us to, really improve the emotional and mental aspects of good health? That's a big question.
It is. And
could you make us good?
So much of it comes down to self-awareness, which is not the same as navel gazing. I really need to say that. It's not the same as being self-absorbed. Self-awareness is when you recognize when you're being self-absorbed. Self-awareness is when you start recognizing the characteristics of the water you're swimming in, so to speak, to recognize the things that come up for you in terms of emotions or impulses or motivations, and being able to be aware of them and make decisions and choices with wisdom, rather than handing them the car keys and saying, take me wherever you're going. I really think so much of it comes down to self-awareness. There are countless tools for that, but it's one way of being, and I'm sure in faith traditions, we certainly say the same thing. It's a way of saying that I am actually not the center of the universe. I am part of this vast network of other beings who are every bit as important as I am, and I'm part of it. So I need to look way beyond just what I have and what I think and what I feel in my world, but to be aware enough to see that to be able to sort of step outside yourself as the defining factor or an arbiter of all things that are right and true, and to see yourself as a part of something bigger. And that takes a huge amount of self-awareness.
That's great. That sparked a couple things for me. Thank you.
Is prayer the same as meditation? Meditation is one of those things that they're always saying, you should spend 20 minutes a day meditating for good health. Do you think they're the same? And what role do you think they have in helping us mentally?
All right. Meditation in the Buddhist tradition is what the Christian tradition calls centering prayer. So it's different nomenclature, same thing. And that has to do with the silence, the quieting, trying to be, as people say all the time, be mindful of the immediate, of your breathing, to empty yourself, to allow thoughts will come and go as weather, and you don't get attached to them. And that's as much centering prayer and meditation. The prayer part, I see more as a dialogue or a conversation, putting things out there like, this is making me crazy. That's a good prayer. Hey, I need some help. That's a good prayer. Or, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. That's a great prayer. And so for me, prayer comes frequently throughout the day, and helps me to remember that I am not the center of the universe and the arbiter of all things right and true, but that I want to be in relationship with God as I would understand God to be. It's a loving presence. For me, meditation or centering prayer, and this, I know I'm going to sound like I've just gone off the edges here, because I have such a robust imagination and an active energy enthusiasm. And, my mind's noisy. My mind's very noisy. I use binaural beats for my meditation, which is, are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
Okay, then I feel like I'm.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Okay. I put headphones on, over-the-ear headphones. They are studio manufactured rhythms that are syncopated in such a way as to change your brain waves. For me, it sounds like I'm in the middle of a washing machine. There's water all around. I could be wading in a creek. That's how noisy it is. But there is also behind it a certain humming that is part of how they adjust brain waves. And then there's the ones I use have lightning and thunder. Well, no lightning, but thunder.
You can actually see with your ears.
Yeah, that's right. Periodically coming through, and that makes it interesting. And it's 20 minutes long. And I started using that I started really amping up using that with COVID.
Oh.
Realized if I'm going to deal with the stressors of everything that this pandemic is doing, my normal meditation centering prayer time was just going off the rails left and right. My prayer life was very vivid because I was saying, I hate this.
Get me out of this.
Exactly. Talk about this, So for me, I thought I really need to ramp up my game meditation-wise, and I need some help with that. So I had bought the binaural beats years ago, but had not really used them religiously.
Yeah. But when I think of those beats, I think of the brain waves, because there's 5 different kinds of brain waves, I think, the gamma and the delta and theta. And, to try to get into that meditative state, your brain waves change a little bit. Like, if somebody was actually putting electrodes on your head and looking inside the waves coming out of your head. And so the music can help you get into, and I wouldn't call it music exactly, because it's kind of annoying at first until you kind of get into it, right?
Well, mine doesn't have any music in it.
Yeah, music's not the right word. It's a sound. Yeah, it's a sound, right?
It is. It's very odd. And the first ones, I was sensitive to it. I was very sensitive to it. So I'd be agitated,
right?
Asked about it, and they had like beginners, a lighter one that helped me do it, and then I build up.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. I'll have to look into that. I used something once. I was having a terrible time finishing a project. Mm-hmm. This was a few years ago, and I just could not concentrate on it. And I found what they called focus music. It was music, but you didn't actually sort of hear. I mean, you could hear it if you stopped and listened to it, but you'd put it on your headphones, and they suggested wearing headphones, and it would be playing. And then I would put that on, and then I would start doing my work. And the next thing you would know, 20 minutes would have gone by, and I would have worked that whole time.
Wow.
And it was the only way I finished that project, which was good because I was getting paid for it. So.
Yeah. And I've used that same technique, but more with Baroque music, with the fugues and things. It's just gets your brain off of that judgment feeling, because with my work, sometimes there's creativity. And when you are forced to be creative and you are not feeling creative, you've got to get outside your brain a little bit and get out of that judgy part.
Yes.
I find, like, even when I was running a lot, you can't judge yourself and be joyful, right? I mean, when you're constantly evaluating yourself, something about that music helps to start a different part of your brain. And I don't know where it is exactly, but it does.
It does. And speaking of music, I had a seminary professor who, when I was going through a difficult time, I don't even remember how the conversation came. It was sort of like, I asked him, his father-in-law had been murdered years earlier. And I said, well, how did you get through that? What did you do? And he said, Mozart's quartets. And I wasn't even sure I heard correctly. What do you mean? And he said, in a world where anything could happen, Mozart's quartets gave me order. And so I started listening to Mozart's quartets, the strings. When I'm writing, when I'm writing a sermon, if there's other noise going on, I will put on Yo-Yo Ma because I can only listen to one instrument. I can't listen to the quartets because then I stop and have to listen to the harmonies and think about those. I can't listen to anything with lyrics because that'll just kill me. So, I'll just stop everything and go be in lyric world. I discovered that if I could listen to a lone single voice instrument, cello, we can argue over whether that's single voiced or not. It would be simple enough and enough order that I could then concentrate and go to what I was working on. So, yeah, I think there are various ways in which the things that we hear can help us focus. For me, that's been a lifesaver meditatively speaking. So,
right. Well, we're all going through, right now, the holiday season with a lot of us being separated from our family and friends and forced not to get together in our normal traditions. So, it's a hard time for some of us. And I was wondering if you have any suggestions on helping us get through the holidays.
See, the reason I'm hesitating is that for the past year and 3/4, I have not been pastoring a church. I'm in a mid-council agency, so I pastor pastors, and they are all running around with their hair on fire, and they're exhausted, and they're running themselves ragged, partly because with COVID, they're trying to figure out ways to do what they do only like Steven Spielberg. So it's just
right.
exhausting.
A lot of pressure, right? A lot of pressure.
It is. And so, our kids are grown. My parents are gone. Our lives are simpler right now. And so, when you're asking about advice for dealing with the holidays, I guess the main thing I would say is what we've been talking about before, the things that are problematic, the things that are frustrating, the things that feel like roadblocks or feel like they're propelling us into things that we don't want to have happen. That's a really good time to kind of pull out the creativity, because that will ask you to explore different ways of addressing what your purpose is for this time. If your purpose is to be with family and you can't be with family, then the question becomes, how can we have a sense of being together when we can't be together? Obviously a lot of people are having a Zoom Christmas, a lot of people doing FaceTime and so forth. But, how to put those things together. There was one Christmas I had years ago where I was a divorced mother. I had, it was the first Christmas morning where my daughter would not be waking up in my house. And she would be with her father's family. And at first I was really bereft. I kept, all I could think of was what was wrong with this picture and why it shouldn't be the way it was. And then I started thinking, what can I do that will make Christmas morning for me all by myself, which sounds so disconsolate. I mean, I was disconsolate about it. What can make it wonderful? What could make it beautiful? What could make it really sweet? And so I started planning a dozen things that I would have this kind of food in the house to make breakfast. I would do this thing. I would listen to this music. I would do things I wouldn't normally be able to do. I would go out and I would go for a walk and I would look for whatever kind of birds might be out in December, what was out, And it became I can remember that was the Christmas morning that I heard wild geese for the first time. This was Pittsburgh. And I don't know, maybe there are wild geese in Pittsburgh now, but there weren't any when this was happening. And I remember hearing them, and it was like something out of a movie. What are these geese doing? And they were flying overhead in that V formation, which to me was just something crazy that I had never seen before. And I remember that day as being really special, because I had to try and figure out what would make it beautiful when none of the things that normally would have made it beautiful were there. Instead of just fighting against what couldn't happen, using our creativity to explore something in a different way.
That's great. That's beautiful. Thank you.
So I'm going to change the topic here for a little bit. You look fantastic, Tracy. What do you do to stay in such great shape? I know your daughter is a runner. She ran a marathon recently.
She did run a marathon recently. She's coming into her badassery early, I have to say. She's okay until she's 50.
What do you do?
About a month into COVID, I started doing Noom.
Oh, yeah.
So what it really helped me to do was, we're back to self-awareness, to pay attention to what food was doing, how I did food, what I used it for. Was I really hungry? You know, as I said before, I'm a head walking around that just has a body that takes my head.
Right.
It helped me to am I really hungry? You know, what is it that I'm hungry for? What is it that I'm wanting to do right now? So that helped a lot. I used to run. I had a knee injury, so the only time I can run now is if I wear a brace on it, and I've sort of slipped away from running, so I do walking.
You did say you walk.
I walk a lot.
3 to 5 miles?
Between 5 and 10.
5 and 10.
At least 3 times a week, sometimes 5 times a week, depending on what my workload looks like. I'm aware right now the sun sets at 4:30, so, that doesn't leave much of the day for walk.
Right.
I have here. I feel like I'm citing all my woes. I had a rotator cuff injury at the beginning of COVID, and so I'm just getting back from that. But I have hand weights that I use to do a little bit of strength training, and I'm just working up. I feel like I'm in kindergarten weight training right now. So
yeah, I think we all feel like that at times.
Yeah,
especially right now.
Do you eat in a particular way? I mean, are you like vegetarian, or do you follow the paleo, vegan, anything like that?
No, I have the taste buds of a 9-year-old boy. If I could eat what I wanted, I would eat things that have orange powder on them a lot.
See, I'm picturing peanut butter and jelly.
No. I'm talking worse than that. That would be healthy. I'm talking orange powder, as in Doritos and mac and cheese and that sort of thing. And I'm talking hot dogs, and I'm talking processed foods, cheese coming out of a can, frosting out of a can. Those would be like my idea of what, if I were to listen to my mouth, that's what I would eat all the time.
Yeah, we don't usually talk about that on this show.
I know, but I'm just doing true confessions here. You are bringing this out in me. So what I do is try very hard to find things that will make my mouth happy, that are healthy, keep foods as natural as I can. And then I also allow myself ridiculous little treats here and there so that my mouth doesn't get cranky. If I do want to have cheese curls or something like that, I can parcel out, what they call one serving, which is ridiculous. It's a little tiny, 28 grams.
Yeah.
But I can do that. I can do that every now and then, and then my mouth goes away happy,
Yep.
and my body's going like, that wasn't all that awful.
Yeah.
You're okay.
So you're doing portion control for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That's all. I hate one of my, and if you look at Enneagram stuff, this is such a 7 thing. I hate to feel deprived. So, I eat the healthy foods, and then I allow little tiny tastes of the things that the 9-year-old boy within me wants to eat. And we're all okay.
Yeah. Cheese in a can. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, I haven't done that in age. I haven't done that in decades, but yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say that we forgot to ask about or didn't ask about?
Let me think. Let me just say this. I would like to thank you, because I really, really appreciate the kind of work that you're doing, that I know I need lessons, so to speak. I know I need some inspiration. I need some sparking to be growing healthier. So I love what you're doing, and I love the spirit with which you do it. And I'm delighted to be here, but also I am totally going to be following you all and learning.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, it's definitely a collaboration, and we motivate each other. I think, having the community makes a big difference for us. You've been great today. I really enjoyed talking with you, and got some really meaningful ideas, and
thank you.
Especially like the creativity in the music.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if anyone has a question for you, they can post it on the Becoming Ellie site or on the Facebook page, and we'll forward it to you.
Okay, that's great. This was so fun.
It was. Thank you so much for doing this and taking the time out of your day.
Oh, my pleasure.
We appreciate it so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Tracy gave me some things to think about. Specifically, I want to check up about the Enneagrams. Enneagrams? I think I said it correctly.
I've done a number of personality profiles, but this sounds a little different. And I would be interested in checking it out too.
I think she said there were 9 different types, and I'm more used to the DISC profile, or what's called Briggs-Myers, which is kind of the same as DISC, but expanded from 4 types of personalities into 16.
Oh, right.
So I'd like to see how the 9 kind of overlay on that, or if they completely break out and they're totally different. It'll be interesting to find out more about that.
And if it has a different focus.
Yeah. Oh, and it might too. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll check that out too.
Yeah. I love how creative she is. She just really sparks joy.
Yes, she does. She does. She's very talented. And we have a link in the show notes to her music that she talked about. So I'm going to check that out as well.
Yeah, I listened to some of them and they're really cool. I mean, they're different and I enjoy they're not all the same, even the different links in the same webpage. I really enjoyed it.
Good. I haven't actually listened to it yet, so I will be sure to do that. The other thing I loved was that Tracy started riding a Harley after she was 50. I'm going to say that riding a Harley is not one of my goals. My balance is not maybe what it should be for that. But it made me think I need to be a bit braver about some of the things that I would like to do. Made me think about, we talked recently about mountain biking, and I immediately went to fear about hurting myself. I'm not saying that I should take up mountain biking, but I think it's something I should at least consider. I don't want to be doing things from fear. I want to be that kick-ass woman that Tracy talked about.
Well, Jill, when I think of you lifting weights, you are that kick-ass woman. I really, admire you for your weightlifting. And I'd love to know what our listeners do for some sort of creative outlet. If you have some ideas to share with us, please let us know at the Becoming Ellie website or on one of our social media spots.
Do share it with us. You can find us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. Don't forget that you can also join our private Facebook group. We'd love to have you.
We're approaching the end of 2020, which I think is good news. Are you doing anything over the holidays, Jill?
Not really. It's not really the year to be doing a lot, is it?
No.
I will probably do a Zoom call with my brother and sister, and I will see my son and daughter-in-law. Plus, I have Penny, the puppy, to play with. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm feeling a little Scrooge-like this year, although I've done some decorating for the holidays and a couple of things that I've enjoyed creative-wise. I'm finding that a little bit of creativity helps. It goes a long way to getting me back on track with things, but the holiday is like no other. Let's just put it that way.
Well, that's true. That's true. Whatever you end up doing, enjoy your holidays, and I will talk to you at the next episode.
Happy holidays to all, and Happy New Year to all of our listeners.
Bye.
Bye.